Hi, Siri. It's great to connect today. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Nate. It's really great to be here with you.
What lesson have you learned from your work that you would most like to pass on to others?
I think it's having a lot of humility about how much we trust our brains and our own decisions. As a behavioral scientist, the more I learn about how the human brain works, how we make decisions in all kinds of everyday contexts, I've gotten more and more skeptical about my own rationality, this idea that I'm always analyzing
Yeah.
things, thinking them through rationally, making all these conscious, agentic, intentional decisions. Because research shows that our behavior on a daily basis is so influenced by our physical environment, what we see other people doing around us, what we think other people would think about our own behavior. Let me share just one example. This is a slightly older study, about a decade old, from the University of Washington by Sapnacharian and colleagues, but I think it just drives this point home so well. She looked at computer science classrooms, and we know, of course, that computer science is a domain that's very heavily male dominated. Only about 20% of computer science degrees around the US go to women these days. And they went into computer science classrooms and ran a randomized control experiment on a very small aspect of those classrooms, which is changing the pictures on the walls. Most of these classrooms started out having gaming characters, Star Wars pictures,
Mhm.
computer games, like these sets of masculine associated imagery on the walls. And in some set of classrooms, without telling the students, of course, they switched those out for nature landscapes and plants and other images that are more gender neutral. And if you can believe it, just that small change of the pictures on the walls that students' attention wasn't even drawn to, it resulted in more women feeling a greater sense of belonging in computer science and more women actually taking more computer science courses in the future. So it just goes to show you how small and subtle these influences on our behavior can be.
One of the reasons I got into, well, I did my PhD in organizational behavior, and one of the reasons I got into basically social psychology just through a business school is because I was so intrigued by all of the mistakes that we're so prone to make that we can so easily make. So I love this lesson of like, let's have some humility because there's so many things affecting us in ways that we don't even realize. So how about in your personal life? Great story. I hadn't heard that study about the computer
Mm.
scientist. Great study. And it's like, who hears that and thinks that's a bad idea?
Exactly, exactly. Well, speaking of a personal example, I share this anecdote actually in our new book, Make Work Fair, that I co-authored with Iris Bennett, about when I went to the dermatologist and I checked in at the front desk and they said, okay, walk down the hallway. You see those chairs at the end of the hallway there, sit there, and the nurse will shortly come in to call you in for your appointment. So I walk down the hallway, I sit on the chairs, I look inside this room with a door open, and I see a man dressed in everyday clothes typing at the computer. And my first thought is, oh, he must be the IT guy. And I'm sure the nurse is on their way and my appointment will start soon. And then in about 2 minutes, this guy gets up, walks out to greet me, and says, hi, Siri, I'm John. I'm the dermatology nurse. And I wanted to just crawl under the chair because I study unconscious bias for a living. And yet I fell into the same stereotype trap that we fall into, all of us, on a daily basis, which is we tend to associate nursing with women, and the
Mhm.
majority of nurses are women today. And IT and technology as a domain is much more masculine stereotyped and associated with men. So not only could my brain not process the potential that the man could have been the nurse, but my brain, unprompted, came up with an extremely stereotypical explanation for what this guy was doing at the computer. And it happens all day, every day. I think the other key insight from behavioral science is that we really don't have any evidence to today to suggest that it's possible to de-bias ourselves, to fundamentally de-bias human brains. Those associations are just so deeply embedded, and the heuristics and the shortcuts that we use to make decisions, again, on an unconscious level, right? We can't interrupt consciously
Yeah.
something that's operating on the unconscious level. So all of us, even the people who study these dynamics on a daily basis, fall prey. But what we can do is surround ourselves with better systems and better processes. And if we lived in a world where 50% of IT technicians were women and 50% of nurses were men, over time, those associations would change. So it's not that change is impossible. We just have to get at it through systems change rather than trying to debias individual brains.
So I heard this example years ago that if the closer you get to the speed of light traveling, the more time slows down. And we don't really have good intuition about that. But presumably, if we
Mm.
traveled near or at the speed of light, like that would probably make sense to us because we would have experience with it. So I think that's a great point that just because we have these associations in our brain, our brain is just telling us things through our intuition about the role of men or women or whatever. It doesn't mean it has to be that way. It's just if we have more experience with the alternative, then our intuition can tell us the right thing. So, okay, let's go back to this example of the nurse. Somebody might say, okay, you stereotype the nurse in your mind, you just assume the nurse was a woman. Some people say, okay, big deal. Most nurses are women. So what's the big deal? So what's the
Mm.
harm that results from some of these stereotypes that maybe on the surface seem benign?
It's a great question. So, statistical discrimination is the economics term for when we use actual statistical data, such as the fact that most women today are nurses, or rather, most nurses are women. We use that to then inform our judgments. Of course, a lot of times that can lead us to make accurate judgments. The problem with stereotypes is that they often also lead us astray. They lead us to see people and situations not as they really are. We misinterpret what's going on, and then our responses, the decisions that we make in response, the things that we do in response, are suboptimal. So there's that. Like in my case, right? The other piece of this is that even if it were true, let's say that, women made better nurses. By the way, there's absolutely no evidence to suggest that this is the case. But let's assume that even if there were, then based on statistical discrimination, you might say, well, okay, it makes sense that the majority of nurses should be women. Does that mean that there aren't men who are better than women at being nurses? Of course not. Would those men then encounter higher hurdles and maybe be discriminated against, have less of a chance to become a nurse and have less of a chance to succeed as a nurse? Yes. And I will argue that's just wrong
Mhm.
because I think my definition of fairness, right, and the one that Iris and I present in the book, is a society or workplace that gives every single individual person an equal chance to succeed, a level playing field on which to do their best work and showcase their talents. So even if, women were, and again, they aren't, better nurses on average, we should give every single man a shot to become the best nurse that they can be, and then ultimately select the best of the best.
One of my favorite phrases is from Annie Duke, professional poker player, and she says that basically everything in your life, the success of your life, everything is determined just by two things: luck and the decisions you make.
Mm,
And luck encompasses, like where you're born and, all of these circumstances outside of your control.
sure.
And then the decisions you make. And so, it's like on one hand, you could say, oh, stereotypes, not a big deal because maybe it's directionally true. But if we want to make the best decisions we can, it's like we need to be combating all of these like intuitions that we get wrong and we want to have an accurate view of the world and we want to be as clear-minded as we can possibly be if we want to make the best decisions we can, which according to Annie Duke is really the only thing we can control in our life that is going to
Right.
determine our outcomes. And so I think the more we can be accurate, clear-minded, and then of course that requires the humility because we're so quick to, our intuition is so strong on many of these items that we make quick judgments about.
Yeah. And you brought up a critical point, which is stereotypes constrain the possibilities that are available to all of us. One of the most heartbreaking statistics or heartbreaking studies that I came across in doing research for our book was a study done on US children, which showed that as early as at ages 4 and 5, kids learn to associate intellectual brilliance with men and boys, more so with women. So when 4-year-old kids are asked to choose between a regular game and a game that's intended for kids who are really, really smart, there's no gender difference in who picks what. By age 6, more boys gravitate toward the game that's labeled as for kids who are really, really smart, and girls start to shy away from it. So I just think about how much talent as a collectively we as a society are missing out on when stereotypes start to pigeonhole people into certain careers and push their lives in different directions so early on, instead of actually giving people the full freedom of choice to pursue the things that interest them and the ones that they are genuinely good at, and reaching their highest potential within whatever domain they end up in.
Yeah, we obviously like. the more potential and talent we can access, the better off everyone is. And then, of course, it just also gets down to an argument of fairness. Like, I mean, I think we all, life is not fair, the world is not fair, but the more we can give people equal opportunities, I think all of us are basically
Hmm.
on board with that. Well, Siri, any final things you'd like to share as we wrap up here?
Just this idea that each of us can do small things in our everyday life and everyday work to make the world more fair. I think you're right. The world hasn't been ever fully fair up until now. Maybe we'll never get there. But if you take a historical perspective, if you look at where we've come from, we as humans, over the course of the last several thousand years, have managed to make the world a lot better. And a much fairer place. So it can be done. We just have to continue the work going forward. If you're a parent with kids, think about the toys that you're giving your kids. Think about the media that they consume. Think about the messages that you're getting from you, from their teachers, from their grandparents, from your family friends about who's supposed to do what, who's
Mhm.
supposed to behave in what kind of way. If you're a teacher in a classroom or a professor at any level, who are you calling on in your classroom? Our colleagues at Harvard Kennedy School developed a wonderful software called Teachly that helps us actually quantify and track from one class session to the next who are we overcalling, who are we undercalling, to make sure that we can give everyone an equal shot at participating in the classroom discussion. These types of small interventions are so important to help make sure that everyone actually gets the level playing field they deserve.
Yeah, I think that's great because it's easy to think like, oh, big deal. Like it's probably going to be close to 50-50. So why are you tracking it? But if you track it and you find out, oh, it's 80-20, like that's a problem.
Mhm.
If it's 60-40, like over time, that's a
That's a
problem and it
problem.
doesn't give
Yeah.
people the same opportunities. So, well, Siri, great. I love these lessons. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast today and I look forward to sharing this episode with others.
Thank you so much, Nate. Loved our conversation.